Quorum.
Yeah, we do have quorum, so I will call this meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is the agenda approval. I believe that Mr. Mendez has some comments that he would like to make.
Yeah, as you saw, Bellamy and Brian, I sent an alternative agenda, which I'm afraid changes a fair number of things around in the sense that it places public comments after the discussion of the hearing procedures, but before we actually vote, so we can actually have the benefit of the public comments and then we can do a vote. Similarly, there's another public comment period after the discussion of the ordinance. So again, we can hear the public comments specifically on the ordinance and then we can vote. Perhaps, do you have that, Bellamy? I mean,
yes.
There's a lot of business to be transacted. Maybe Max could share that, or so that I could propose it as a formal alternative.
Let's see.
How do you feel about that? I mean,
agenda adoptions, public comments. So it looks like we're going to change that. Update director, hearing procedures. We're going to move.
I just put it on the screen for you.
Okay, good.
Brian.
Yeah, so essentially the idea is.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yeah, just real quickly, I've always thought that public comment was to be able to consider statements from the public that may, be of importance before we take a vote. Well, I guess you're inserting public comments after our discussion, but it's kind of interesting to have public comment so that when we have our discussion, those of us who are moved or interested in what someone has said can kind of bring that forward, perhaps as part of our discussion. But certainly would like to vote on that.
Yeah, that was certainly the intent. It was okay. To, we have these, I think, really important elements of business tonight, and I wanted to reserve as much of the public comment space as possible for them, and then we could also have another public comment period at the end if there is sufficient time and there are other issues that people want to raise. So I would propose to adopt this amended agenda. I move to adopt the amended agenda.
I did want to make one additional, and I'd like to piggyback on your motion, Bill, is that I'd like to, after we adopt the agenda, to perhaps have a moment of silence to recognize that we are meeting on the night of 8/12, when the city went through a lot of things, and out of the trauma and the fire and the faith and the rage that signifies this day, that the impetus for an oversight board, I think, was born, or at least the crest of the wave began to push this city towards at least, civilian oversight.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's called a friendly amendment. And
thank you.
I would agree. I think that, that could be the first thing we do.
I agree. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. Miss Robinson, could you pull the board, please?
Yes. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Dr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
And I don't believe Ms. Gilmore has joined us, right?
No, she's currently not here. So the proposed agenda by Mr. Mendez passes with the recognition of a moment of silence. Are we we're looking at 30 seconds, a minute.
I think 30 seconds.
Okay, a 30-second. Miss Gilmore will not be joining us this evening. 30-second moment of silence.
Ms. Carpenter, thank you for that reminder. It's really important, and I appreciate you reminding us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Now we'll recognize the 30-second moment of silence. Thank you for that, Ms. Carpenter.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Just go back to, this is not where we are. So next would be the adoption of minutes. Does anyone have any changes that they would like to propose?
And there should be 2 minutes there, but there are only one because the computer ate my homework. So the July 8 minutes are, I'm still trying to recover them, and I hope to do so shortly. Otherwise, I'll recreate.
Okay. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
I move that we adopt the minutes, would that be the June minutes?
The July 14th.
July 14th meetings as written.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Ms. Robinson, could you pull the board?
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
So that passes. Next, we have the status of the complaints. Since our last meeting, we've only had 2 complaints come in. One was for professionalism from an African-American female, and the other is was for failure to address noise complaint. All other complaints have been closed at this point in time. Are there any questions? Okay. Next on the agenda is an update on the executive director process. I'm still going to go ahead and read this statement. I'm disqualifying myself from participation in any board discussions or actions relating to the city's recruitment of the executive director because I applied to be employed in that position. I have filed a written disclosure statement with the clerk of council, and that statement is available to the public upon request from Ms. Robinson or Ms. Thomas. At this time, I turn over the gavel to the vice chair until the board's discussion of the recruitment process is finished, and I ask that the minutes of this meeting reflect my verbal disclosure. Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. I spoke with Mr. Boyles, the city manager, this afternoon to get the latest news about how things are going, and the interviewers. I'll provide what I know, and if the interviewers have anything else to add, they can certainly feel free to do so. As I understand it, the board interviewers essentially came up with 2 very good candidates, and the city manager agreed that they were both extremely qualified, and so there was no disagreement. The first choice individual got another job, and so he is no longer in the running. And so the still very qualified, second preferred alternative, who was recommended by our interviewers and who Mr. Boyles agrees is a good candidate, has just been sent a job offer. And so negotiations have begun. Anybody else have anything in addition to add?
I would just add, Mr. and Mr. Watson can chime in as well, that I was one of those two, Mr. Watson and I together, that it wasn't just us. The process, just for clarity, involved a panel at several stages of the process, of which Mr. Watson and I were part. But when it came down to the final, bringing the consensus to the city manager, we were charged with that responsibility. We met with the city manager and the deputy city manager, Ms. Marshall, and made our recommendations along the lines that you just outlined, and that a recommendation has been made to the city manager, who will then make a recommendation to city council, who must finalize the recommendation, and will do so, I believe, at a meeting in September, once the negotiation, assuming the negotiations go well and all the contract has been agreed upon, it will have to go to council for final approval. James, would you add anything to that from our involvement?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much you covered it all right there. So now we're just pretty much waiting to see what happens. And I don't know if Miss Marshall would like to maybe give. I don't know if she has any more of an update other than everything that was just said.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, but really everything has been covered by you all as the members as to where we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Real quickly. The composition of the panelists, did that match our ordinance? Because don't we have a specific section in our ordinance that talks about the hiring of the executive director and who's supposed to be on the panel? Was there anybody on the panel that was not identified as an approved panelist?
I don't know, Mr. Chair, you want to speak to that, because you have
Yeah, I mean, the letter of our current ordinance says that you know, we are allowed to have two people participating.
No, not with the CRB. I'm talking about the interview panel as a whole. Doesn't it identify which city staff people are part of an interview panel, or is it pretty ambiguous that they can ask anybody?
That's pretty much up to the city manager, I believe, and he has, you know, so yeah. So no, we have very little say over that.
I would say, Mr. Vice Chair, that you know, we were allowed two representatives, which we provided to the panel, and then the city manager appointed the others, and we moved forward from there. So it was my understanding, after an inquiry during the process, that we were in compliance with the ordinance, Ms. Carpenter.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, well, I hope things work out, and thanks again to our interviewers for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think that's all there is on this topic. Mr. Chair.
Okay, very well. Let's see. Looks like the next item on the agenda is the hearing procedures discussion. Does anyone have any comments from the draft, or any changes that they would like to submit on the hearing procedures itself, not the ordinance?
Have we received any additional comments from the public since the last meeting?
I am not aware of any that have been sent.
Were you including the ones that you received fairly recently, Mr. Mendez?
This is it. I got all those on the ordinance.
Oh, in the ordinance.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You're talking about the hearing procedures. I'm sorry. My bad.
And have there been any significant changes since the last version?
No. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, seeing none. Where are we? Mr. Wheeler, could you open the floor for public comment on the hearing procedures?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you're in the audience, you'd like to address the PCRB, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. Each speaker will get up to 3 minutes. And again, this is public comment on the hearing procedures. We have one hand raised right now. This is Sarah Burke. Sarah, you're on with the board and you've got 3 minutes.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for putting public comment, Bill, on after each section. I think that's really helpful and helpful, you know, for the future too. I can't really say what to say in this section, except that it's really unclear from the public perspective whether any of the comments that were made verbally in the last meeting that you all decided you wanted to hold off on voting before you possibly incorporated our comments or chose not to or discuss them further. It's not possible to tell if you all did discuss those further, if you did incorporate the comments made in the public comment section last time on hearing procedures. I mean, I guess I could go by, you know, page by page and try to compare the last draft versus the draft that you currently have on the agenda, but it's challenging. So I would like somebody to just give us an update on whether the comments that were made by me and other folks about your hearing procedures in the last meeting in open public comment were taken into account, what you all did about that, and whether there's whether there were any changes made. That'd be really helpful to help navigate what the process is. Thanks.
Do you want me to ask for other hands?
Sure. Ms. Hudson, did you want to say something?
Certainly happy to. And just to set the premise for the comments, the draft hearing procedures copy that was shared and posted at the last meeting, as the chair, vice chair, and I worked out post-meeting, was not the latest draft. So the draft that was posted after the meeting was the one that we should have been speaking from. And in my recollection, the nature of the comments that were made at the last meeting had already been addressed in the correct draft. As I recall, for instance, there were comments regarding the lack of any provision for cross-examination. The correct draft that was posted permits cross-examination qualified by factors such as pre-submission to the board of cross-examination questions, which then may be propounded by the board itself or possibly by the representative of a party in the board's discretion, trying to take into account both the concern that was expressed about complainants possibly being intimidated by the prospect of cross-examination, but at the same time recognizing the general due process related opportunity for persons accused of misconduct to cross-examine, to confront meaningfully witnesses and evidence against them. So that was addressed. There had been, at some point before this draft, comments that were received about limitation of complaints and therefore hearing, parties to hearings as the actual victim of misconduct or witnesses to misconduct. The draft that is under consideration tonight and that was posted after the last meeting as the correct draft addressed that by expanding party to include persons who are not necessarily the direct victim of an offense or of the conduct that is the subject of the complaint or hearing. Those were the most significant comments that I recall of a substantive nature. If there are others and anyone is willing to refresh my memory, I'm glad to speak to how we addressed those. But as I recall, the comments that were made orally in the meeting last month corresponded with comments that that the board had received by letter from both the or email from both the People's Coalition and from Mr. Fogel. I do not recall other public comments that the board asked me to address.
Mr. Wheeler, would you just poll the audience if there are additional public comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're still taking public comment on the hearing procedures. If you'd like to get in line, click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're on via telephone, you can press *9. I don't see any additional hands.
Okay. Very well.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I'm
yes.
sorry. In looking through my notes, I recall too that the draft hearing procedures left open to discussion and final determination by the board the matter of the period of time in which the police department has to respond to the board's request for evidence, for record evidence and other evidence necessary for its to conduct a hearing based on all the evidence that had been collected to date. 10 days is asserted as a placeholder only, with the understanding that to state it as 10 days means 10 calendar days. There was some discussion, I believe in connection with public comment last time, as to whether or not that should be 10 business days and so specified, or another number of days specified as either calendar days or business days. And that remains to be decided in order to replace that placeholder definitively.
Sure. I would think that 10 business days would be, I guess, the best route. But I mean, other board members can.
What does the document actually say now?
And now it has 10, the numeral 10 inserted with a question mark, which is to indicate that the board needs to make a final decision on that number and on whether it's business days or calendar days.
Yeah, it's material from the city police department, which PCRB shall request by notifying the chief of police of the complaint within 10 days. This would be the business or calendar days of receipt of a request from the PCRB. The chief of police shall cause to be delivered to the PCRB.
And then it simply itemizes the items, the nature of the items requested, but it is indeed that time period that still needs to be specified. It sounds as if the chair has proposed 10 business days.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, if we're talking about, the general public to, say that they're necessarily going to operate on the weekend to get whatever, items that they need. Well, wait a minute. That's not what I'm talking about. Let's go. Hold on. Materials requirements. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the business day count has typically been standard. We know that this Charlottesville Police Department has a lot going on, and that's just my perspective, is that the business days would be better than calendar days. So.
Yeah, I concur, Mr. Chair.
I'm good with the 10 business days. The only issue with that whole thing, and I think somebody made a comment, I was trying to read through the minutes. The only issue though, beyond that, or that goes along with that, is the fact that there's really no teeth. If they say take a hike, right? I don't think there's any teeth. That hasn't been our experience. There is some teeth, ma'am. if they get, you know.
I was just waiting to be recognized by the chair, but
Okay.
the teeth, so to speak, are in the ordinance. The ordinance draft, at least as it stands right now, the proposed amendments to it purport to provide those teeth, and that it states that they shall provide this information. There is no discretion there. Obviously, there may be times when the police department suggests that there are reasons that they cannot or should not comply, but the ordinance compels compliance, or it's proposed that the ordinance compel compliance. And so the procedures have to be read in conjunction with the ordinance requirements as well.
Yeah, I'd be perfectly happy to, vote on adoption of the hearing procedures with a suitable change to 10 business days.
Is there a second?
Yeah. Are we just voting on the change to put it business days, to specify it as business days? We're not voting on the whole ordinance right now, are we? Because I did have one last question. I was waiting for Bill to finish.
Please continue.
Oh, okay. Okay, if we're still in discussion, I wasn't really sure if on the draft that we have, I know last time there was some concern, you were talking about comments. There was a concern about in the hearing procedures that the complainant had to submit all of their questions in writing, and that was a concern from a couple of commenters. And is that, I didn't see that it necessarily had changed, but I just want to throw that out there as a quick question for our resident expert, Bill.
I'm sorry, Ms. Carpenter, you were saying, well, could you, I guess, clarify or repeat that again?
Okay, certainly. I know over the phone is kind of difficult. One of the public comments last time when we were talking or having public comment, they brought up the fact that the complainant would be mandated to submit all of their questions in writing ahead of the hearing. Okay. And there was some concern about that being a burden or whatever to the complainant. And I didn't see that had necessarily changed, which I was just asking, was that comment taken into consideration, or it's just, was a comment and nothing further, no other further consideration was taken. Does that make a little bit better sense?
Yeah,
that's to that if you like, Mr. Chair, or
yes, Miss Hudson.
In going back and looking at the correct draft, Ms. Carpenter,
yes, ma'am.
I observed anyway that it was not a situation where the complainant had to submit questions in advance. The provision actually reads the parties, which means both people, those persons advancing a complaint, as well as the persons whose conduct are called into question, either directly or through their representatives, may submit written questions to the board to pose to witnesses, but they don't have to. And the board has the discretion to allow a party to pose their questions directly to witnesses without any prior submission of those questions in advance of the hearing. We're also talking about in the course of the hearing, not in advance of the hearing being called or being convened.
Super. If you could see me, I'm jumping for joy at that answer. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Well, and it occurs to me too that as you speak, Ms. Carpenter, other comments come to mind that, again, didn't at least trigger changes, because when we looked at the correct draft, there was at least the thinking that they had been addressed. And another one, and I think this is the last one that is occurring to me as you speak, had to do with the inference that was permitted to be drawn from a party's failure to appear or a witness. And the current draft read this way, the one that was the actual accurate draft. And this is at the subsection entitled Policies Governing Hearings, Part B, participation by the parties and witnesses. In the absence of a lawfully issued subpoena, no party or witness is required to participate in a hearing. But the PCRB may infer, discretionary, from a party's or a witness's voluntary absence from a hearing, despite notice and a request to appear, that their truthful participation would have been adverse to the interests of such voluntarily absent party or witness. The edited sentence that had been added to address the concern raised about that, because I think it was described as scary, was that the application and or weight of any such inference shall be determined by a standard of objective reasonableness under the circumstances. So that the concern about that, given the various reasons for which folks might be absent from a hearing, would be taken into account. If you're acting under an imposed objective standard of reasonableness under the circumstances, that contemplates that the inference will not be automatically made disregarding what the circumstances might be. So while that might not satisfy the concern about that, the thinking was that it at least mitigated that concern to some significant degree.
Sounds good. Sounds very good.
Are there any additional comments or questions on hearing procedures? Seeing none, is there a motion to, well, yeah. Is there a motion to vote on the hearing procedures with the 10 business day change?
You mean, is there a motion to adopt or?
Or yeah, motion to adopt with the 10 business day change.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Robinson?
Mm-hmm. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Dr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Very well, that passes. And it looks like we are at another section of public comment. Mr. Wheeler, would you?
We actually adopted the hearing ordinance. We've passed it. It's on the table. Hallelujah. You all are great. This is a good. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's quite all right.
I'm just thinking here, if I may interrupt, Mr. Chair, that I kind of accidentally stuck in a separate public comment, an extra public comment section here. You might want to put it at the end of the end of the meeting, perhaps.
Okay.
I know, I guess we can't change the agenda, so let's do it.
The chair could also treat that as a clerical error, and by consensus, you all could consider it such, depending on how you wish to proceed.
Yes, this clerk is not perfect.
Okay, so is there a consensus to treat, and I don't think we need a formal vote, but is there a consensus to treat that as a clerical error? Yes.
I'm fine.
As the person who made it, yes.
Okay. All right, very well. So the next item on the agenda is the ordinance discussion, and I will give that to Mr. Mendez.
Okay, thank you, Bellamy. I did apologize because, you know, the revised version of the ordinance appeared in your inbox about an hour before the meeting started. The reason for that is sort of we wanted to respond to last minute or timely comments, but still last minute from interested parties, including Sarah Burke and Teresa Hepler. If you look at the document that has been sent out for public comment at our last meeting, and you compare it to what is changed here, there are primarily small editorial corrections and amplifications. And so the essential structure remains unchanged. There were two, what I consider to be substantive comments that we wish to address. And the first was the comment that in the previous draft, the city council was given what seemed to be an unbridled authority to propose or promulgate operating procedures. And under this revised draft, we have changed it to modify that power somewhat so that the city council has the final say over operating procedures and changes to operating procedures at the recommendation of the board, so that we retain a little bit more control while recognizing that the city council is ultimately is the ultimate authority. We retain some more control of our own destiny. The other change that was made was we had a provision in our, let's see here. A provision that basically allowed the board to, and this would be in section 2458, to review the board may elect to review any or all completed police department internal affairs investigations. But that is in section A. And then in section B, we imposed some limitations related to timing that cut down on our ability to revisit cases that occurred that were filed more than 1 year after the date of the incidents, or that were where more than 75 days had passed since the internal affairs department had completed their investigation. What we came up with was a modification, a new section C to 458 that says the board may review investigations beyond the time limits specified in subsections 2 and 3, which are the ones I just referred to. If one, the board concludes by majority vote, there's a good reason to do so. So that gives us a lot of power. If we find that there is new evidence, for example, we can then go back and re-examine a case. Or we can ask to review an investigation as part of an audit function that is taking place as described under 2461B. In other words, internal affairs files aren't automatically closed to us to audit simply because 75 days have passed. So those are the only two major changes. Everything else is pretty much the same, unless Cynthia, can you think of anything more that we?
You have summarized the material substantive changes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. So any questions?
Doesn't appear to be any. Is that everything for you, Mr. Mendez?
I think we can hear public comments.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay. Mr. Wheeler, would you poll the audience for public comment on the ordinance?
If you're in the audience, you'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. Each speaker will get up to 3 minutes to address the ordinance. First up is Teresa Hepler. Teresa, you're on with the board. You've got 3 minutes.
Hey, y'all. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great. This is Teresa Upler from the Legal Aid Justice Center. First, I just wanted to stress how amazing it is that you're all at this point with the ordinance and how far you've come and how, for the most part, great it looks and how it really seems to balance what you all heard from City Council over the last few weeks and the work session, but also what you have heard from the public. And I know he's getting up and walking away, but I also wanted to shout out Mr. Mendez for all his incredible work and how much effort he has put into this. And I think he really can't be praised enough for that. But in terms of my substantive comment, I really only have one comment, and that refers to what the board is going to be investigating, what complaints the board is going to be investigating. So the way that this is written now, it says that when the board determines that a civilian complaint filed with the board or incident merits such an investigation. So I think the only issue I have with that, I understand that you're keeping it broad and I think that's a good idea. However, the only issue I have with that is that the public is not given a guarantee that if they were to file a complaint with the board, it would be investigated by the board. I think that there are always going to be situations where the board might, rather have it, have the freedom to choose to not investigate a complaint. But if you, for example, look at the Alexandria ordinance, Alexandria does make promises in the language of shall. The Alexandria ordinance, or excuse me, the PCRB shall investigate certain complaints. And I think that y'all would benefit from guaranteeing the public that certain complaints absolutely shall be investigated and that you have the discretion to investigate others, and what those complaints are going to look like need to be spelled out here in the ordinance, which has legal authority, law giving power. So I think it's just important for the public to know when their complaints are going to be investigated, absolutely, by the board when they experience police misconduct, because that's the whole purpose of the board. But otherwise, the ordinance looks great, and that was my only concern. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's anyone else who'd like to get in line, please click the raise hand icon. Next up is Sarah Burke. Sarah, you're on with the board. You've got 3 minutes.
Hey, everyone. I want to echo Teresa's gratitude to Bill and everybody on the board for doing such an amazing job at balancing these really complicated issues with political will and community input. I have just 5 comments. One is that the ordinance lays out certain powers, but it says that you do not get to use any of those powers until City Council passes operating procedures. And I just think that most of the meat of the work that you do will be in those operating procedures. And I just want to be sure that you all have ensured from City Council that your board, as it stands now, will be able to operate under its current ordinance and utilize those powers until those, because there will be a big gap between the operating procedures getting passed and now. I also think that you all should give the executive director and staff the authority to both conduct investigations and conduct audits themselves without having to go through third parties all the time. I think that will encourage the board to investigate more complaints, as Teresa was talking about, and won't say, oh, well, we can't investigate that complaint because there isn't enough money to do it. We don't have money to hire an independent investigator. You don't want cost to be a factor in determining which complaints or incidents you investigate. So I think you want to expressly give that authority to the staff of the board, that you all get to then dictate which complaints get investigated. There's also a statement in there that the internal affairs investigation review capacity that you have is only conducted if the complainant files a request for review. And that puts the onus on the complainant to basically sort of appeal the internal affairs decision, which I think you don't want to create that barrier if possible. And I just noted today, it wasn't a comment I made to you yet, Bill, because I was just looking over it today, but that you permit yourselves recommendations on discipline in only serious cases. And the serious cases language comes from the state statute where you would be implementing discipline and the final disciplinary authority. But I don't think you have to limit disciplinary suggestions to only serious cases. That's not within the statutory language. I agree with Teresa's comments wholeheartedly that she made. And then I just wanted to note this draft is not available anywhere in the agenda items or on the website. And the hearing procedures weren't available attached to the agenda. So I'd like to see that happen in the future so we can just keep track of what you all are referring to a little bit better. Ooh, and I'm done with time right under the wire. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate all your effort, and to you too, Ms. Hudson.
If there's anyone else who'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon. I don't see any additional hands.
Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, I can just address just a few of those suggestions that Sarah made. And again, Cynthia may be able to advise me on legal issues. In terms of our powers, the continuity of the board over the next period during which, we're still wrangling with the council or anticipated over the wording of the ordinance and the operating procedures. There has been no suggestion whatever that this board will cease to function. I think as far as I'm concerned, we're operating, we have no choice but to operate under the 2019 ordinance until we pass a new one. So that's one thing. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I forgot to mention the issue of the executive director or staff doing audits. That was another issue that we discussed among ourselves. And I think you're aware that, early on in the process, I don't recall exactly who it was, there was the issue of, well, if the executive director is an employee of the city manager, and then we're going to have, him or her, responsible for evaluating police performance, that's not independent. And also, I think other consideration that was influential to us was that if we were to assign the executive director or staff responsibility for conducting investigations, that might serve as an excuse to not hire an independent investigator and might actually impede our ability to do investigations. And so we had to kind of make a choice. And the language still in the ordinance refers to an independent investigator. We have bandied about the possibility that in the procedures, the operating procedures, it might be possible to say that a suitably qualified executive director may be tasked to do an investigation. And the ED and staff are, by the way, right now, totally allowed to do audits. So, that's a thing. If I can answer Teresa, and I sent you an email earlier, so you know what I'm going to say. Basically, the approach that we took in the ordinance to maintaining our power to investigate was to make it as broad as possible. And you have hit it exactly on the head when you say that we need to have objective criteria in our operating procedures that will give the people, the public, the kind of guarantees that they need, so that they know this will be an activist board and not a reactivist board. And I think going back to Sarah's, I think the idea that we could make recommendations in other than serious cases is worthy of consideration, and you know, probably worthy of further discussion. You know, and the final comment about, you know, please let's make this public and so everybody gets to see it. Unlike my normal self, I'm willing to go one more month and, you know, make changes in response to these comments, and then take a vote next month, if that's what the rest of the board feels like we should be doing. End of story.
I don't, personally, it seems like there is, I guess, positive consensus on where we are currently. And I don't see any point in, you know, belaboring, you know, where we are. I think at any time, you know, addendums can be made. Obviously, they would have to be additionally adopted by council, but I don't see the merit in delaying.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to use the excuse, but it's certainly true that we're going to be fighting over every one of these points and every one of these words and phrases with the council, and we can be sure of that. So this is nobody's last bite at the apple by any means.
Are there any other comments?
I was just going to say, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Dr. Frazier's on mute, so you can go ahead, Ms. Carpenter.
Okay. I was just going to say that I think that I'd rather take a vote now. I think that it's a good version, and I'm ready to put it in the hands of the city council.
Dr. Frazier?
No, I concur with Ms. Carpenter. I'd like to get something in the can, and then we, you know, then the job of negotiating with council begins. But I think we should go ahead and codify it at this point.
Okay, I have presumptuously taken the liberty of drafting a short resolution, which I forwarded to you, Bellamy. I don't know whether we can put it up or not. Or I can send it to Mr. Wheeler.
Yeah.
Once again, in keeping with comments about the public not having seen items to be voted on, it might be more appropriate under those circumstances to solicit a motion for the board's pleasure with respect to adoption of the ordinance, given that at least a majority of you have seemed to indicate that you're ready to vote tonight, rather than present to you all a resolution to vote on that you have not yet seen and that the public hasn't seen. But okay. I leave that to your discretion.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I agree. It's much.
I'm sorry, you lost me there, Ms. Hudson. I'm sorry.
I was just saying you haven't. No one has seen the resolution that I believe Mr. Mendez was suggesting that you vote on as part of the a possible motion to adopt the ordinance as as Mr. Mendez has described it, with those edits he described. I thought it might be cleaner procedurally and more consistent with at least desired notice provisions to simply solicit a motion on the board's pleasure with respect to adoption of the ordinance. Excuse me, with respect to the adoption of the proposed amendments to the ordinance for submission to council for review, I guess would be the nature of the motion. But again, always at your discretion, Mr. Chair, as to how you seek to proceed.
No, I think that's advisable. And Mr. Mendez, if that's obviously all right with you, we'll look at moving forward with what we currently have, given that the entire board and the public hasn't seen the resolution.
I guess it's okay for me to move that we adopt the amended proposal and proposed amendment and forward it to the city council for consideration.
You said amendment or the ordinance?
Amended ordinance, basically the
okay.
Amendments to the ordinance. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Ms. Robinson, could you pull the board?
Yes. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Dr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
So that passes with the great thanks of Mr. GSD, Vice Chair Mendez.
Well, the struggle has only been, we haven't
just begun to fight.
Very well. So that takes us to our next item on the agenda, which is old business. I believe a few meetings back, Ms. Carpenter had requested the Charlottesville Police Department climate survey. It was, I guess, voted upon that we would take a look at one and then decide later on if we wanted to review the others. I think we have gotten to the point to where that review is necessary. And if anybody has any comments. Okay, seeing none, we do have to vote on requesting from the Charlottesville Police Department the other 69 surveys of the 70 that currently exist. Is there a motion to request from CPD the other 69 surveys?
I make a motion that we do just that. Request those other 69 surveys.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Robinson?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Dr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Okay. So that passes. So we will move forward with requesting the other 69 surveys. So the next item on the agenda is the chairman's statement on the need for strong leadership on police oversight. It's been modified a little bit on police leadership and its community impact. And so we'll just go with that. Good evening, members of the board, city leadership, and the community. While I'm currently chairman of the Civilian Review Board, the views in this statement are purely my own. I believe that there is a crisis in leadership and morale in the Charlottesville Police Department. Over the course of the past year, I have been meeting with officers from the Charlottesville Police Department in order to become a better informed member of the Police Civilian Review Board. Many of those conversations have led me to speak with other senior leaders in our community for corroboration and additional facts. Those sources will remain confidential, However, the content of this statement has been corroborated by at least 2 sources for the facts presented. This statement is made without regard to race or gender, but rather leadership capacity and effectiveness. Over the course of my discussions with CPD officers and other senior local leaders, the board has learned of the existence of a command climate survey, that which we just voted to receive the rest, which was designed to provide an internal gauge of the conditions of the Charlottesville Police Department. The Police Civilian Review Board was provided with one of the 70 response forms. The respondent states that leadership takes problems around the department personally, leadership is not open to evaluation and improvement, and that the survey will not be taken seriously by leadership and used to move the department as a whole in a positive direction. It's further stated that the officer is actively seeking employment elsewhere, with leadership and their decisions being a major factor. Of particular note, the officer states, "I would really like to see the morale in the department be in a much better place. This is huge in retaining staff. Pay is important, but appreciation is key," end quote. It's also my understanding that the other 69 responses present a similarly dire picture. Additionally, the Police Benevolence Association has subsequently conducted another survey under which 80 to 90% of the 65 responding officers reported a negative view of the climate inside of the Charlottesville Police Department due to the perceived leadership shortcomings. I've also been made aware that officers of the PBA have been threatened with retaliation if the survey is published. Through additional conversations with senior local government leaders, the problems with police morale and unresponsive and inflexible management have been known for some time, but no action has been taken to date. It is my recommendation that community members email and call all members of City Council and the city manager every day until action is taken on behalf of the greater good of the community. Additionally, it is my recommendation that community members follow my lead and support City Council candidates in favor of strong police oversight for Charlottesville City Council in November. If there was ever a case showing why this board should be fully funded and supported, this is it, due to the fact that this is the only government entity that has been transparent with the public on this matter and bringing this to the public's attention. A strong policing oversight body would also provide officers with a place to bring reports of abuses and policy violations without fear of retaliation or fear of an unfair process. I've also received correspondence that's been sent to members of city leadership, and I'll just read a few excerpts. The men and women of the Charlottesville Police Department are hurting. They are looking around the national and local landscapes and only seeing negative examples and opinions of police work amplified at the expense of the majority in this profession. Naturally, we would look to our leadership in the department to demonstrate our good works and represent us as police officers to our community. Unfortunately, we have lost faith in the leadership of this department. We've realized that we can no longer rely on the standard procedures that provide due process. As mentioned previously, there was a subsequent survey, and from that, I will read just 5 questions. 1, if you are accused of violating policy, do you believe you will receive a fair administrative process? 82% of the 65 respondents said no. Have the actions of leadership caused you to reduce your normal policing activities, traffic stops, arrests, community policing, etc., for fear of being unfairly targeted? 82% say yes. Do you feel professionally supported? 71% say no. Is training at CPD readily available, sufficient in scope, and applicable to your daily duties? 63% say no. What are the 4 largest concerns CPD faces presently? And these are in order: lack of trust and faith, unfair discipline, low morale, and pay. From the information that's been provided to me through officers in this community. I believe it is incumbent upon us as a community to hear what they are saying and to request that city leadership take action as appropriate. When I arrived on this board, I arrived with the intent of advocating for community members in the community. Advocating for officers in the community never crossed my mind. However, due to the current climate and what we are trying to do as a board, this is something that's necessary in order for us to get to where we need to go. And that's the truth. That's being transparent. That's letting the public know exactly where we stand as a community in this particular space. And with that, I will open it up to comments from any members of the board. Yes, Dr. Frazier.
Mr. Chair, I would only just support your comments and say that in my discussions, again, confidential discussions with stakeholders, the feedback that I've received comports with your statement. So I am in full support of what you just expressed. Thank you.
Very well. Are there any additional comments?
Yeah, hey, Bill, I think what you've been doing is fantastic all across the board. And, you know, trying to reach out and just talk to people within the department. I think that's wise. In my time, I've heard some of the same things. I mean, I would like to see the actual data, you know, but I definitely commend you for speaking out and being transparent and shedding light on something that I think has been on a lot of folks' minds. And again, I look forward to getting the data and really seeing what's going on. Thank you.
Very well. Any additional comments? Seeing none. The next item on the agenda is adjournment. Do we have a...
I apologize. You know, if we want to put that third public comment session here, that's really where it should go.
Okay.
So if there is any, you know, and we have plenty of time, so.
Sure. Sure, that's fine. Mr. Wheeler, would you poll the audience for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you're in the audience, you'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon. Each speaker will get up to 3 minutes. First up is Jeff Fogel. Jeff, you're on with the PCRB. Go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. I think you're all getting ahead of yourself. You have to remember that it was the PBA that was fighting hard not to have a police civilian review board, not to acknowledge the history of bad conduct by the police. They're upset, for example, I think, because they haven't been specific, things like the police chief firing the person who assaulted my client, LaQuinn Gilmore. Is that what they're upset about? Why don't they say, I agree, you want to take a look at it? Let's look at the facts. But the facts are not what you were talking about, Mr. Brown. You seem to be interposing your own personal beliefs in what should happen. You haven't done that with other kinds of conduct where the police officers have been outrageous. And so I think you're way ahead of yourself and a little bit off. If you want to get into this question, you better start asking some questions of those police officers to be specific and not so interposing broadsides against the leadership of the department. I have my obvious disagreements with the department about a lot of things, especially, as you know, internal affairs issues. But I also know that we have problems with police officers all over this country that come with a mentality that is not consistent with what we want to happen here in Charlottesville. And so for you to jump on board of the PBA is a big mistake and starts to question whether or not you're going to be a fair person in considering cases coming up through the system where the PBA is going to be representing officers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wheeler, are there any additional comments?
Anyone else who'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon now. I don't see any additional hands.
Very well. The next item on the agenda, does any of the board members have any additional comments? Okay, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Robinson?
Yes. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Dr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.